So this is the first video on my channel where I'm going to talk about actual meta, but I still want to keep this somewhat creative and competitive at the same time. So this will be a deck theory video. I'm going to talk about ratios. I'm going to talk about the concepts behind how the deck is supposed to work. And most importantly, I want to talk about why this matters based on the current driving forces in the meta. So those driving forces are really non-engine cards like Mulch Army Foolos, Dimension Shifter, certainly Dimensional Barrier, and to a lesser degree, maybe this will become more popular, Droll and Lockbird. So if you were playing an excellent deck, which is not good into these non-engine cards, that excellent deck is not as excellent as it could have been in, a different type of non-engine meta. So Yubel, just to give you a bit of like a reference point, is still debatably in a vacuum, if you ignore the non-engine people who are playing, the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Debatably, or at least close to. But Snake Eyes has a much better time playing around cards like Foolos. So imagine that you get Foolos in the standby phase. You can't make Phantom of Yubel in the standby phase. You can still, in Snake Eyes, you have an option to go for different types of like quarter or half boards. So you could make like just a temple play where you have, you're going to push up an IP Masquerena and you have a Flamberge and you're going to go into like a Little Knight, for example. You get the Little Knight banish, Flamberge will float into bodies and recovery, and maybe you can survive on hand traps. Maybe. You can also go for a slightly further board that gives them maybe one or two more draws where you also make the rabbit, and so you have like Silhouette Rabbit, you have the Masquerena that gets pushed up on Temple, and maybe you have a much better chance of surviving, especially if you have a couple hand traps in your hand. So those types of options are like pretty reliable options the deck can do pretty consistently. Now the difference between doing that, like Rabbit setting an Azuroon or a Silhouette trick, and then a Masquerena play off of Flamberge, plus having a Kashtira card is a very big difference. When you're down to only a few interruptions, having a Fenrir, probably preferably a Fenrir, but also a Unicorn on your board is the difference of like one more interruption when you only have two or maybe three. Like that's a lot more interruptions, relatively speaking. So I think that these cards play a lot better into both D-Shifter and Foolos, and also Droll, depending on how you play. Obviously, if you start your turn, summon this search and you think your opponent's playing Droll, you're just playing yourself. These cards play worse into Perulia, but if you're not playing against Tenpai, a lot of people have completely taken Perulia out of even their side deck just because they're on Foolos. Some decks are still playing both. So, you do have to think about the trade-off there. These do play worse into Perulia, but far better into Foolos. And that's even if you never use their effects to search because you're so afraid from Droll, or you wait to see if they Droll you, and then if they do, you can search off of these effectively. Also worth mentioning, this is a very strong interruption, and your opponent will often have to play awkwardly to play around it. Banishing 3 cards from your opponent's grave is a pretty strong effect. The other thing that's really important to talk about before I get to the non-engine that I have in here is the size of your Fiendsmith engine. So a lot of decks are choosing to go to a single engraver. You may have noticed the price of Engraver has dropped pretty drastically recently, and that is because this card plays very, very, very poorly into both Foolos and Dimension Shifter. Your opponent gets way too many draws for you to resolve the basic Engraver combo where you have Engraver in your hand, or you make Closed Heaven and you go through it that way with like the Necro Princess or whatever. So you could fully optimize this deck by playing... fully optimize this deck in the context of Foolos and Shifter by playing just a single Engraver and not the second Engraver, the Lacrima, the Tract, and the Lurie. The reason that I am still opting to play these cards, and this is a trade-off, okay, so I'm not saying this is objectively the best and everyone has to do this. The trade-off is like this. If you look at the number of excellent cards in your deck, so these are cards that it doesn't matter if it's a starter or an extender, or if you already started playing, or if this is the first card you're playing for the turn, these cards are phenomenal engine. You have Ash, Bonfire, Wanted, Witch. These are 10 cards so far. Deception, that's 13 cards so far. If you play a single Engraver only and none of the rest, the Engraver isn't actually doing anything as a draw. It's not a hard brick, it's a soft brick because you can still specially offer the Requiem, but you would be at 13 super solid, really good cards that are both good starters and extenders. Now, obviously, there are other cards like Poplar or Oak, or even the Temple or the original Sinful Spoils that can still do something, but preferably if you have other cards in hand. If you play a larger Fiendsmith engine, then the Engraver and the Lacrima, because remember, just because you would normally be getting this off of your combo from the deck doesn't mean that it's not a card that you can't draw. This card and the Tract, all of these are actually phenomenal starter extender cards. All of these cards you can actually, even the Lurie, you can use in the same way because of Lacrima. Because, you can summon Lurie, turn Lurie into Requiem, bring out Lacrima, Lacrima dump Engraver, and you have a very easy time linking up into Desiree plays or generating additional bodies. So your resource game is far better, and your number of excellent cards, starter extender cards, goes up by like 1, 2, 3, 4. If you don't want to count either of the normals, then at least 3, because it would be 2 Engravers and 1 Tract, or if you play 3 Engravers or multiple Tracts, it could be more. So yeah. Then there are other cards that are good cards, but they're not excellent starter extenders. So stuff like the Kashtira stuff. So as I mentioned, these cards are great into Shifter and the Fool Loss stuff. Also into Droll, if you play correctly. Just don't search immediately, You get Drolled after doing something better than that. So these cards are just generally solid. They also help with additional bodies for Skull Dread plays, which I'll show you in a minute. So those cards are great. Now, getting to the cards that you don't actually want to draw. So, Hallowed Azamina is not a brick depending on what you draw with it. Like if you've already drawn a Wanted, for example, it's not the worst thing, but you don't really want to draw this card. Dimensional Barrier. This may seem controversial. So, the thing here is, if you get Shifted or Fool Lost in standby phase, and you lose the game because of that, but there was something you could have done about it, it means that your deck is not optimized. So do you take the trade-off of maining one card where if you go second, it's a brick, but if you go first, you don't auto-lose to like a Shifter or a Fool Loss? And I feel like the power level of these cards, Shifter and Fool Loss in particular, are so strong. And the decks that play them well, like Tenpai, are so good and so reliable at killing you that turn that you do have to accept the trade-off and take this as a brick going second, which you normally would never want to do. It makes it feel a little bit worse to play Silhouettric or Azurune. I'm not going to debate between the two. Play Azurune if you want. It's by far the most popular one, Azurune is. It makes it feel worse to play this card because now you have 2 cards that are bricks going second and you don't want to draw them going second. But the Rabbit is also such a major part of playing around these cards like Dimension Shifter and Fool Loss that you simply have to play it. So you must accept these types of bricks into your deck. I will say that you also need to think that Snake Eyes, Diabellstar, and Flamberge and Birth are all cards that you also don't want to draw. And so having like 5-ish cards that you really don't want to draw, and then depending on how you want to count the normals, I mean, Lurie and Lacrima are excellent normals, but not if they conflict with the Snake Eye normal. You do have a bunch of cards that you don't want to draw, and that is true. But, this is the trade-off that I'm trying to explain here. So then we look at the power spells, and here I'm opting to go for a power spell approach instead of hand traps. That's mostly because I want to show that you can do this a different way, and also because I think that Thrust is way better on the dice roll than Debarrier, and so if you want a way to search Debarrier or Debarrier access to not lose to Shifter or Fool Loss, that should be through Thrust and not maining more Debarriers, because that's worse going second. These Droll and Lockbirds, I feel like could be something else that would be thrust targets like Raigeki or Dark Ruler and stuff like that, and I think that those would be equally fine. I am testing these out for now, and I think this card maybe is a little bit underrated in the current meta, but I'm not sure, so that's why that's in there for now. Also, I'll briefly mention that any chance you have to add some synergy in to your deck with your non-engine, like planets being free sends off of Droplet and stuff like that, then you take those chances, or you take that synergy. For the extra deck, I'll just say that there's not a lot of space, and so there are lots of things you could debate should be in here. One of the more interesting things I've seen recently is Goddess of the Closed World, Goddess of the Closed World. Aside from the cheeky effect where you can use Moon, and a lot of people won't think you're even playing Goddess, and maybe you can use 2 of their monsters, it's just the idea that instead of like the Raging Phoenix OTK, the Xylantis OTK, or Access Code, is that Goddess is kind of a breaker. Because if your opponent has something you can't out, it doesn't have to be exactly a Towers monster, but something you can't get rid of for some other reason, and you make Goddess, and you get rid of that thing, then it kind of acts as like a breaker. Because your opponent isn't just going to like throw their first interactions at every single thing you do just because you're putting bodies on the field. So I think Goddess can be good and also somewhat surprising if not a lot of people are playing it. So that's really definitely worth consideration. I feel like the access code can be dangerous because you don't want to ban. There are a lot of things you don't want to banish that are link monsters unless you're absolutely confident you're going to kill them. The last thing I wanted to mention, and I'll show this in the combos, is Skull Dread. So this card is, well, this card has always been good, but I think it struggled to find its place in the meta. And in my opinion, if we had more floodgates, which the game should not have, and hopefully Konami does not bring those back, this card would be way better because it would be more reliable that you could draw 4 into a floodgate and put back 3 and keep the floodgate. So anti-spell is at 1, skill drain is at 1, summon limit is banned, but we do have other stuff like debarrier, and it is also worth mentioning that because a lot of decks play Fucho anyhow, like to not lose to the Tenpai matchup in the Snake Eyes stuff, this card, which is popularized in Flu, is still broken. So if you control a winged beast monster, until the end of this turn, negate any monster effects your opponent activates. So this is way better than Skill Drain. This is actually one of the most broken cards in the entire game, because this is a lingering floodgate and it's chainable. It's not a continuous trap that has to remain on field to apply its effect. So if you have a winged beast, then you can thrust for the Featherstorm, or you can Saryuja to draw into a Featherstorm, or a thrust for a Featherstorm. So those are all things that you can consider that help make cards like Saryuja extremely strong. I feel like this is main deck worthy, but it's really hard deciding what to cut. So, you know, maybe you could cut the Raging Phoenix Celantis package to put in a Skull Dread and an access code. But yeah, I don't really know what's good on that. If anybody has any feedback or opinions in the comments, I'd be happy to hear it. Last thing I'll mention, this is more cheese than any. This is the least competitive thing in the entire profile. This card, though, is very hard to play around. So target a level 7 or higher light fiend monster you control. For all intents and purposes, that will mean Desiree. That will basically always mean Desiree. Send all cards on the field to the graveyard that are not that monster. So this is kind of like the that Exodia card. I think it's called Fires of Rage or whatever. Then this also has a grave effect. So if your opponent special summons a monsters while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card, send 1 Fiendsmith monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard. So this can get into the grave very easily because Lacrima, so this card says if it's normal or special, you can send a Fiendsmith card from your deck to the graveyard, except itself. So it doesn't have to be a monster, it can be any card. And this one, you can banish this to send a Fiendsmith monster from your deck or extra deck to the grave. So if you send the Desiree, then the Desiree just has to shuffle back another Light Fiend, and then you get to target a card on the field, send it to the grave. Now it does target, but it also sends. So I feel like, you know, that's kind of like fair enough. You know, sending is obviously better than destroying because it procs less stuff. So that's something you can consider, but it is a little bit janky. Okay, let me get into the actual replays now. So I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff with the new cards, but first, I just want to give you an idea of how you should be thinking when you play this deck. And because this deck has so many different lines, you should think, like, have some idea of what kinds of hand traps your opponent may have. So if you want to play around Nib, okay, let's say you're starting with just the Snake Eye stuff. So you summon Ash, you add the Poplar specials itself, that gives you the Temple. Temple often you'll find placing Snake Eye Diabellstar. In this case, we need to place the Oak because we're going to use the Ash to bring out the Flamberge here, and we're going to get back the Oak. So we don't need the Snake Eyes Diabellstar yet. Now here we go into the Masquerena, so we did that so that we would have 2 for the Flamberge to bring back. So the Flamberge triggers here, the Poplar triggers here, and the Pop replaces the Flamberge. Now at this point, it's probably worth mentioning, okay, here's how to think about Nibiru and how your deck interacts with Nibiru. So if they Nibiru you here, which they won't, but this is important for the rest of the combo, what happens is the Temple will see that your opponent has, sorry, where are we? If your opponent normal or special summons a monster, so they will because they nibbed you, then you can target a monster card on the field, treat it as a continuous spell, special summon it to your field. So we have the Flamberge as a continuous spell, so they would nib us, then we would bring the Flamberge up, and the Flamberge could place the Masquerena in the spell and trap zone, and then at least on their turn, we could Temple again, bring out the Masquerena, and then the Mask could link itself off and the Flamberge into, for example, a Little Knight, and then that would float the Flamberge and we would get follow-up. Obviously, that's not good, but your opponent isn't going to nib you here, so you're going to get further before this comes up. Okay, so you oak. Here you start going for the closed heaven lines, and you bring out the lacrima. You always do this because this is way better at your resource loop for the fiendsmith stuff. And so here you're able to bring out the engraver by shuffling back the closed heaven, and you still have a total of 3 light fiends currently in rotation. So now you go into the sequence. The sequence brings out the Desiree by shuffling back. So then you equip the sequence to the Desiree, and you use the Promethean Princess to bring back a body. And now the Desiree will negate the Princess. So this is what makes this excellent in this deck, is being able to do exactly this. And so now you can link off those two things into something. So here's why playing around Nib matters, okay? You rabbit here, and you set, this could be your Azuroon, okay? Don't complain about the Silhouette trick. So you could set your Azuroon, set your Silhouette trick. So now your opponent, they've never been under any pressure at all to nib you, because you were never threatening at any point a Wave High King Caesar. Because remember, when you linked into the sequence, you used the Engraver and the Lacrima. So that was a level 6 and a level 4. So you could never have made the Wave High King Caesar, right? So if you're here and you say, okay, pass turn. So you're passing turn on this field. You have, this just represents whatever non-engine. And, you know, whatever was in your hand. It could be hand traps, could be whatever. Your opponent says, okay, end of main nib. Now, Desiree can't save you from nib. So what happens is you lose the Masquerena, you lose the Rabbit, you lose the Desiree. And then 2 things happen. So the same thing happens with the Temple, where the Temple will special the Flamberge. You didn't lose the Flamberge's place effect, so the Flamberge will place the Masquerena, okay? So that still works the same way on your opponent's turn. And then the Desiree will be able to trigger by shuffling back the sequence to send their Nibiru. So then it's not like they can just start their turn and like force your Masquerena by saying, okay, going battle phase, and then you have to like Masquerena immediately to Little Knight their Nibiru, and that's cringe, you know? So that's better because you get rid of the nib, so they can't just immediately go battle phase to force the Masquerena, and you also have the Azuroon or the Silhouette trick. You may recall from the deck that I was just showing you the Kashtira cards. So if you don't get nibbed, then you would have a board like this and a Kashtira card. Plus, you know, if you draw on some other engine, you would also have something on top of that. Okay, so that's the first combo. Now let me show you that... let me show you why you might want to use Skull Dread. So here is using a Deception combo. So you Deception, and you tribute a monster to get the Hallowed Azmina. You bring out the Murcielago. That searches the Wanted because you haven't used Witch yet. You get the Witch. The Witch sends whatever to search the original Sinful Spoils. Here you make Masquerena. You can make Closed Heaven. There are lots of different ways to do lines like this. The important thing to remember is no matter how you do this combo, and I'll show you this 2 different ways so that it's crystal clear, you do not want to use the on-field effect of this card, okay? You can only use one of this card's effects per turn. Otherwise, this card would be like the most broken card in Yu-Gi-Oh! So this is just fodder while on the field for Hallowed Azmina, okay? So now that the Murcielago went to the grave, we can shuffle it back to give us back the Hallowed Azmina. The only reason you would not do this is if you're playing around Bestials and you shuffle back the Murcielago from on field, so there was never a dark in your grave to begin with. But I'm just showing you the combo. So now you use Hallowed Azmina to send the original Sinful Spoil, so that goes to the grave. Now, because this has a grave effect, you get to banish this from the grave, and also remember that the Wanted draw shuffles back from banished or grave. So you've never lost any value ever from not using this card's effect, okay? Because you're using the grave effect to search. So now you search for Snake Eye Ash. Remember the first combo I showed you, all we had was Snake Eye Ash. Now we only just got here, and we already were pumping. So we had the Masquerade on field, we had the Ilya Sylvia. Okay, so now we normal summon the Snake Eye Ash, and we search the Poplar, and the Poplar summons, and we get the Divine Temple. Here is going to be a little bit different to before, because now we are cooking with gas, so we're going to place the Snake Eyes Diabell Star, because we want more. So here we can use the Snake Eye Ash effect. Oh, by the way, you may be wondering, why wouldn't you just do like a Closed Heaven line instead of Masquerena to like force the worst case scenario of they have like Nib Imperm or Nib Veiler, and you just try to go for the Wave High King Caesar and the Ilya Sylvia. Now, I will say that if that's what you're playing around, then that is probably better, because if they use the Nib Imperm, maybe you can like, they'll use the Nib Imperm, and then you still can use your Snake Eye stuff later, but they also may be able to just hold it for a lot longer and Nib Imperm you later, and you'll lose to it the same way. So I feel like it makes more sense to think about playing around just the nib, or, you know, playing in ways that are resilient to Fool Loss and stuff like that. Anyhow, let's continue. So we bring out the Oak. Oak gives us back the Ash, here we make the Moon of the Closed Heaven, and we place back our Snake Eyes Diabellstar because we haven't used this effect yet. So at this point, we don't have Flamberge in rotation because we still want that, and we also have not done the Fiendsmith stuff. So now we get the Lacrima dumps the Engraver shovels back the Closed Heaven to bring itself out. The exact sequence here isn't super important. What matters is that you make Skuldred and you still have a Light Fiend on field to make the sequence. So the Skuldred, okay, has put the Flamberge in the grave so that we can float it. It has also put the Masquerena in the grave. And we have our setup for the Engraver, the Lacrima, and the Requiem. So this is the general game state that you want to be in at this point. Hopefully you haven't used your Ilia Sylvia yet, or maybe you have, and you're about to draw. So this is the point where, like, either you are siding, going first, looking for a broken floodgate, you know, like Anti-Spell or Skill Drain or TC Boo, or you have like some unfair hand trap type card like Droll and Lockbird that you're looking for, or maybe even like a Dominus Impulse that you're going to be setting. I mean, you could hold it, I guess, in your hand if you want, but you could also set it. So yeah. Also, one other thing to mention is not to forget that this card can special summon from your hand, and it doesn't care what the level is. So if you were stuck with like a Flamberge in hand or something weird, you can special summon that card from your hand. This actually can come up, especially if you like hard draw the Lacrima or the Lurie, and you didn't have a way to get like a Snake Eyes monster or the Lacrima or the Lurie out of your hand, and you get to this, you know, that helps. Okay, anyhow, so now we don't have any more use for the Skuldred because we're not using the special summon effect, so we make the sequence, we special the Desiree, we bring out the Princess, we Princess give us back the Flamberge, okay, and now we can negate the Princess. The Flamberge can place our IP Masquerena because we never did that. And here we make the Rabbit, and the Rabbit sets the Azurune or the Silhouette trick. So, yeah, this is what you can do off of one Deception in this deck right now. And then we didn't even get the one to draw yet. So now we wanted, and we put back the original Sinful Spoils. And the reason that you might want to save this for last is if you're doing the Saryuja draw, you don't want one of your potential draws to be the original Sinful Spoils that you can't use anymore. So, yeah. Okay, so that's that combo. Let me show you that you can do the same thing if you draw Witch and not Deception. Some people get a little bit confused if they're new to the decks, but because the sequencing is a little bit different. So what is different about this play is that it's the Murcielago that searches the original and not the Witch. So the Witch would set it, but this one adds it to hand. But you'll see that this doesn't change anything because when you turn those into whatever, so it could be Closed Heaven or Masquerena or whatever, and you use the Howled Azamina to shuffle back the Murcielago to add it to hand, you just activate it and you send the original from your hand instead of from the field. And so now you'll see that you're in basically exactly the same point of the combo where you're searching for the Ash as your normal summon to get the Poplar for the field spell to place the Snake Eyes Diabellstar, and you cycle through that combo where you want to get access to the Flamberge. And here I'm just choosing to go through the Fiendsmith stuff first. And you make the same Skuldred play, and you do your draw, you look for your broken card, you make your sequence. You bring out the Desiree, you bring out the Princess, bring back out the Flamberge, you negate the Promethean Princess after you've placed the Masquerena, and then you Rabbit. So it doesn't matter. The other thing that I wanted to show you is if you're not playing Skuldred, or, and this is like, I'm not flaming, if you've learnt the combo around the Skuldred line, but you're not playing Skuldred, you might be doing it in the same way. And so I just want to show that you could be doing some like a line in a kind of a weird way, and you can still end on like more or less the same type of board. So, we're running through this combo, okay, you start doing the Snake Eyes plays, place your Temple here again, Snake Eyes Diabellstar in rotation, here's the Oak, the specials are Ash, you go for the Closed Heaven stuff, the Lacrima dumps the Engraver again, and our Snake Eyes Diabellstar brings itself out, and we get to this point where we would normally have made the Skuldred to dig for 4, and then link that off, you know, for like a sequence or something. But we're not playing Skuldred now. So even though we've done this in slightly weird way, I feel like it's kind of risky to use the Flamberge and the Snake Eyes Diabellstar for a rank 8 because you want the Flamberge in rotation. And now that, like in my build at least, you're playing both Aziroon or Silhouette Trick and also like a main deck D-Barrier because of the Fualos shenanigans and D-Shifter, so you have something to search off of Thrust. You don't want to play like 2 Flamberges, you know? Like people were doing that before to make the rank 8 plays more feasible. So anyhow, here we make the Rabbit. The Flamberge gives us back 2 bodies. We set the Silhouette Trick or the Aziroon, and now we have a bunch of bodies here still. Remember, the Rabbit can't be used as link material the turn it was link summoned. You still make the sequence the same way. You make the Desiree. You make the Promethean Princess with the sequence. Bring back your Flamberge. That can place your Masquerena, and then you equip your sequence here. And here now at this point, it's like, this could be awkward because now you can negate your princess and you have like a princess and a Snake Eye Ash that aren't doing anything. So you don't want them to be on board. And also, you never want the princess specifically to be on field because you want its grave effect to be live at all times. So you always want something to link this off into. I'm not sure what's best here. I think it depends what is in your extra deck, like exactly what you've decided to play. Because, you know, like the easiest thing is that you would just make a Little Knight, but that then makes it so that your Masquerena isn't going into a Little Knight, which is fine because your Masquerena could do something else. You maybe could make like a Closed Heaven, for example. Like if you made a Little Knight right here, so the Princess and the Snake Eye Ash become the Little Knight, and then you pass turn and your opponent goes to play, at some point you push out the Masquerena, and then you would have to go like Masquerena plus, I don't know, like the Flamberge and the Rabbit, maybe, and then a monster your opponent controls, and those would go into Goddess. So that would make it to where it's not bad to make the Little Knight here. The other thing that I think is kind of important that might make Little Knight better here is, let's say that you were trying to play around like a Nib Imperm, Nib Veiler type situation. Obviously, at this point, if your opponent goes like Nib Veiler or something, there's nothing that you can really do about that, right? Like, you'll get to push up the Masquerena, but you've already used your Flamberge effect, and so you can't get it back, and so you'd be in a weird position. But if you made the Little Knight here, you at least could chain the Little Knight to the Nib and dodge with something, and so that in combination with the Ilia Sylvia, you would save something on your field. So, you know, you'd still be, maybe you'd like Little Knight save itself and the Flamberge after, you know, negating the other thing. Like, cause they would have to like preemptively, you know, Imperm or Veiler the Ilia Sylvia and then go Nib. So you would have used this, and then you would chain the Little Knight to protect itself and the Flamberge, because the Flamberge won't float again this turn. Then they would Nib. The Divine Temple would push out the Masquerena. The Desiree would send the Nib, and you still get back the Little Knight and the Flamberge in the end phase. So I feel like maybe like that's what I can think of, but maybe you have a better idea. So what I was just doing here is I was just saying, like, okay, whatever. What if I just make like Raging Phoenix, Zelantis or something, and, you know, come up with something later. But yeah, maybe Little Knight is the better idea there. So let's see how I'm doing for time. Okay, let's quickly do some final thoughts. So I think that this is an actual competitive take on the deck. I think that this takes into consideration the driving forces of the meta right now, which is mostly Malcharmi Fualos, Dimensional Shifter, also Dimensional Barrier, and possibly also Drone and Lockbird. I think that there are some trade-offs, mostly with the size of the Fiendsmith engine. So my main suggestion to you, if you wanted to drop the main deck count, would be to just play a single Engraver, and then cut the second one, the Lacrima, the Tract, and the Lurie. I think that you can play this same exact build with hand traps, and you can take out the power spells for that, but I kind of liked it because of the idea of searching the 1D barrier. And I also really like the idea of being able to play Saryuja and search for broken cards, whether it's super high impact cards like Droll. Maybe even like, you know, searching for a Nib is not the worst idea if you're thinking that your opponent is going to break most of your board and you have stuff that floats, and so you don't mind playing under your own Nib. You know, there's stuff like that could work that you could draw into, but mostly the broken floodgates. Think about stuff like D-Barrier and how you can get to it. So yeah, that's all for the video. Thanks for watching.